I stood in the foyer of the home I'd bled for. "He needs a room," Dad demanded, pointing at my unemployed brother. They thought they owned me. I just smiled, locked the deadbolt, and initiated a legal and financial maneuver that would cost them everything. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The silence was the most expensive thing I owned. It wasn't the Italian marble countertops in the kitchen, or the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, or even the imported hardwood floors that felt cool and solid beneath my bare feet. It was the silence. It was a Saturday morning, barely 7:00 a.m. For the first time in my 32 years of life, I wasn't waking up to the sound of screaming, or the thud of heavy footsteps, or the passive-aggressive clatter of dishes meant to guilt me into getting out of bed. I was waking up in my apartment, my sanctuary. I sat up in bed, the high thread count sheets rustling softly. My muscles still ached, a deep, resonant throb that lived in my bones. It wasn't just from the physical move the day before, carrying boxes, because I was too paranoid to let movers handle my grandmother's china. It was the exhaustion of a decade. 10 years of working 60-hour weeks as a senior UX designer, taking freelance contracts on weekends, eating rice and beans, and wearing shoes until the soles flapped open like hungry mouths. I had starved myself of joy for 10 years to buy this silence. I swung my legs out of bed and walked to the kitchen. The sun was just cresting over the neighboring skyscrapers, painting my living room in hues of gold and soft pink. I started the coffee machine, the gentle gurgle the only sound in the world. I closed my eyes, inhaling the aroma of dark roast, feeling a profound sense of safety settle over me. I was finally untouchable. Then the knocking started. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a heavy, authoritative pounding that rattled the heavy oak door in its frame. Thud, thud, thud. My stomach dropped. That knock, I knew that knock. It was the rhythm of my childhood, the sound of demands, the sound of "open up, you're in trouble." I froze, the coffee mug hovering halfway to my lips. It can't be, I thought. They don't know the unit number. I never gave them the address. "Evelyn," the voice was muffled by the soundproofing, but unmistakable. It was rough, gravelly, and laced with an impatience that made my skin crawl. "Open the damn door." It was Arthur, my father. I set the mug down on the counter. My hand was trembling. The piece I had spent 10 years buying had lasted exactly 12 hours. I tightened the sash of my silk robe, another luxury I had promised myself, and walked toward the foyer. I checked the digital peephole camera mounted on the wall. The screen flickered to life, revealing a distorted, fisheye view of the hallway. There they were. Arthur was standing front and center, wearing his business jacket, a worn tweed blazer he only wore when he was trying to intimidate someone or ask for money. He looked red-faced, likely from yelling at the concierge downstairs to let him up. And slouched against the wall behind him, looking at his phone with absolute disinterest, was Frank, my older brother. He was 35, wearing a hoodie that looked like it hadn't been washed in a month, and he had 3 large suitcases and 2 garbage bags stuffed with clothes piled around his feet. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't a visit. This was an invasion. I unlocked the deadbolt, the metal click sounding like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. I didn't open the door immediately. I took a breath, armoring myself, putting on the Evelyn mask, the cold, professional persona I used in boardrooms to shut down arrogant tech bros. I pulled the door open. Arthur didn't say hello. He didn't say, "Congratulations on the new place." He didn't even look me in the eye. He just gestured vaguely at Frank. "About time," Arthur grunted, pushing past me into the foyer without an invitation. He looked around, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the value of the lighting fixtures, the flooring, the space. "It's smaller than you made it sound, but it'll do." Frank didn't move. He just looked up from his phone, gave me a half-hearted wave, and kicked one of the suitcases toward the threshold. "Sup, Evie," he mumbled. "Do you have Wi-Fi? My data is capped." "What is this?" I asked, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Dad, Frank, what are you doing here?" Arthur turned back to me, his face twisting into that familiar expression of scornful authority. "What does it look like? Frank's lease was up. He's got nowhere to go. You have 2 bedrooms. He's staying here." He said it with such absolute certainty, as if he were commenting on the weather. As if my home was public property. As if my 10 years of sacrifice were nothing more than a savings account for Frank's failures. I looked at Frank, who was now dragging a garbage bag across my pristine hardwood floor, leaving a streak of dirt behind him. I looked at Arthur, who was already walking toward the kitchen, opening my cupboards. The betrayal hit me harder than the exhaustion. It wasn't just that they were here. It was the assumption that I existed solely to catch them when they fell. "He's not visiting, Evelyn," Arthur called out from my kitchen, grabbing an apple from my fruit bowl and taking a loud, crunching bite. "He's moving in. You're letting him live here." The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis of a terminal illness. It was the realization that to them, I was nothing but a host organism. I stood frozen in the hallway, the cool air from the corridor drafting in, chilling my ankles. Frank had successfully maneuvered 2 of the suitcases inside and was now struggling with a plastic bin that looked like it was held together by duct tape and hope. "Careful with the floors," I said, the words slipping out automatically. Frank ignored me. He dropped the bin with a heavy thud, scratching the finish of the entryway. He didn't even look down. "So, which room is mine?" "Dad said the second one has a view of the park. I need natural light if I'm going to focus on my streaming career." I blinked, the absurdity of the statement washing over me. Streaming career. Frank, you haven't held a job since the gas station incident 3 years ago. "I'm building a brand, Evie," he scoffed, finally looking at me with those droopy, entitled eyes. "You wouldn't get it. You're just a corporate drone." Arthur walked back into the foyer, chewing the apple loudly. He looked at the luggage, then at me. "Don't just stand there, Evelyn. Help your brother with the bags. He's got a bad back." "I am not helping him," I said, finally stepping fully into the room and closing the front door, but not locking it. I needed an escape route or perhaps an ejection route. "And he is not staying here. I moved in yesterday. I haven't even unpacked my own clothes." Arthur's face darkened. The transition from casual patriarch to enforcer was instantaneous. He took 2 steps toward me, invading my personal space. I smelled stale tobacco and cheap aftershave. "Now you listen to me," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Your mother and I have discussed this. Molly is sick with worry about Frank. He's been going through a hard time. His landlord was a tyrant. He needs stability. You have this." He waved his hand dismissively at my apartment. "This fancy glass box. You have plenty of money. You are family. Family helps family." "Family helps family?" I repeated, feeling a bitter laugh bubbling up in my throat. Where was family when I was eating ramen for 3 years to pay off my student loans? Where was family when I was in the hospital with pneumonia and drove myself home? "That's different," Arthur snapped. "You're strong, you can handle things. Frank is sensitive." "He's 35, Dad." "He's finding himself?" Arthur roared, the sudden volume making me flinch despite myself. "And you will support him. I'm not asking, Evelyn, I'm telling you. He stays until he gets back on his feet." "And how long will that be?" I asked, looking at Frank, who had already wandered into the living room and was testing the bounce of my beige sofa with his dirty jeans. "As long as it takes," Arthur said. "He's your brother, you owe him." "I owe him?" The words echoed in my head, bouncing off the walls of the apartment I had paid for with my youth. I watched Frank pull a bag of chips out of his hoodie pocket and crumble them onto the rug. He didn't care. He genuinely believed he had a right to be here. He believed my success was a communal resource, a reservoir he could tap into whenever his own well ran dry. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from Molly. "Is he settled in yet? Make sure he eats something warm. He gets cranky if he skips breakfast. Love you, sweetie." The manipulation was a pincer attack. Molly played the soft, worrying mother, and Arthur played the hard-fisted general. They had coordinated this. They had probably planned it the moment I told them I was closing on the apartment. They had waited for me to sign the papers, to get the keys, to do the heavy lifting, and then they had descended like vultures. I looked at Arthur, who was now leaning against the wall, arms crossed, a smug look of victory on his face. He thought he had won. He thought that by shouting and invoking family, I would crumble just like I did when I was 16. But he had forgotten one crucial thing. He had forgotten that I was a UX designer. My entire career was built on anticipating user behavior, identifying pain points, and creating systems to manage them. I dealt with logic, with contracts, and with hard data. And more importantly, Arthur had forgotten that I was the one who handled his taxes last year. He had forgotten what I had seen in those documents, and he had definitely forgotten the little clause in the power of attorney he had signed over to me when he went in for his hip surgery. A document he never formally revoked because he was too lazy to file the paperwork. "You're right, Dad," I said softly, my voice dropping to a register that was deceptively calm. Arthur's shoulders relaxed. He smirked. "Good, glad you're finally seeing sense. Now go make some breakfast, we're hungry." I walked toward the kitchen, my hand brushing against the cool granite of the island. I wasn't going to make breakfast. I was going to make a phone call. But first, I needed them to get comfortable. I needed them to commit to the trespass. "Frank," I called out, "do you want coffee?" "Yeah, whatever," Frank yelled back, turning on my 65-inch television. "Do you have the sports package? I want to watch the game." "I'll check," I said. I picked up the heavy porcelain coffee pot, feeling its weight. They thought they had trapped me in my own home. They thought this was the end of the discussion. But they had no idea that I had been preparing for this war for a very, very long time. To understand why my hand didn't shake as I poured the coffee, you have to understand the decade that came before this morning. When I graduated college, Arthur and Molly gave me a card. Inside, there was no money, just a handwritten note from Molly that said, "Spread your wings." That same week, they bought Frank a brand new truck because he said he wanted to start a landscaping business. The landscaping business lasted 3 weeks. He sold the truck 6 months later and kept the money. For the next 10 years, this pattern repeated itself with sickening regularity. I got a promotion. Frank got a bailout. I bought a used Honda. Frank wrecked Arthur's sedan and got a pat on the back. I worked through Christmas. Frank showed up to dinner high and was given the biggest portion of the roast because he needs his strength. I became the easy child, the one who didn't need maintenance. The cactus in a garden of orchids. Because I didn't demand water, they assumed I didn't need it. And because Frank withered at the slightest breeze, they poured everything they had into him. I remembered one specific Christmas. I was 26. I had just landed my first major client as a freelancer. I was so proud. I brought home expensive gifts, a watch for Arthur, a spa day for Molly. Arthur opened the watch, grunted nice, and put it aside. Then he turned to the room and announced, "Great news, everyone. Frank is thinking about applying to culinary school." The room erupted in applause. My gifts were buried under the wrapping paper of Frank's potential. He never applied to culinary school. Now, standing in my kitchen, I watched them through the open concept layout. The primary antagonist of my life wasn't bad luck or the economy, it was Arthur. Arthur was a man who defined himself by his control over others. He was a retired shift supervisor for a logistics company, and he ran his family like a loading dock. He demanded absolute loyalty, but offered zero protection. He was a man of traditional values, which simply meant he believed women were caretakers and men were kings, regardless of their competence. He stood in my living room now, running a finger along the top of my bookshelf, checking for dust. He was short, stocky, with silver hair cropped close to his skull. His eyes were small and hard, like beads of flint. He didn't look at my apartment with pride, he looked at it with envy. He hated that I had succeeded without him. He hated that I had something he couldn't claim credit for. And then there was Frank, the secondary antagonist, but in some ways the more dangerous one because he was a bottomless pit. Frank was currently reclining on my sofa, his feet on the coffee table. He was soft where Arthur was hard, doughy, and pale from years of sitting in dark rooms playing video games. He had a way of looking at you that made you feel tired, a weaponized incompetence. He wasn't malicious in the way Arthur was, he was parasitic. He truly believed the world owed him a living. "This TV is nice," Frank shouted, "but the refresh rate seems a bit low. You should have got the OLED." "I'll keep that in mind," I muttered. Arthur walked into the kitchen, leaning against the counter, blocking my path to the fridge. "So, let's talk logistics," he said, his voice dropping to that confidential tone he used when he was about to ask for money. "Frank's going to need a stipend." I froze. "A what?" "A stipend," Arthur said, as if explaining gravity to a toddler. "He can't look for a job if he's worried about buying toothpaste or bus fare. You're making—" "What, 6 figures now? You can afford to give him $1,000 a month, just until he gets on his feet." $1,000 a month," I repeated, "and free rent and food." "Don't be stingy, Evelyn, it's unbecoming." Arthur reached out and patted my cheek. It was a demeaning, possessive gesture. "You've done well for yourself, but don't forget where you came from. You're only here because we supported you." The lie was so bold it almost took my breath away. They hadn't paid a dime for my college. They hadn't co-signed my loans. I had eaten oatmeal for dinner for 3 years. "And what if I say no?" I asked. Arthur's face hardened instantly. The mask of the benevolent father slipped. "Then you're an ungrateful brat who hates her family, and I'll make sure everyone knows it. Molly is already upset with you for not offering sooner. Don't break her heart, Evelyn. If you kick your brother out on the street, his blood is on your hands." He leaned in closer. "Besides, you're a single woman living alone in the city. You need a man around the house, for protection." I looked at Frank, who was currently trying to fish a Cheeto out from between my sofa cushions. "Protection." "Right," I said, "protection." I picked up the tray of coffee mugs. "Why don't we sit down? I have something to show you." "That's better," Arthur smiled, thinking he had broken me. "See, it's not so hard to be a good sister." I walked into the living room and set the tray down on the coffee table, right next to Frank's dirty feet. I looked at the two of them, the tyrant and the parasite, comfortable in my space, consuming my resources, planning to drain me dry for the next decade. I sat down in the armchair opposite them. I crossed my legs. I took a sip of my coffee. "Actually," I said, my voice crisp and professional, "before we discuss the stipend, there's a small administrative matter we need to clear up." "What matter?" Frank asked, mouth full of chips. "The matter of the deed," I said, "and the matter of the mortgage fraud investigation regarding the house you and Mom currently live in, Arthur." Arthur went still. The color drained from his ruddy face. "What did you say?" he whispered. "I said," I smiled, "we need to talk." The silence that followed my declaration was different from the peaceful silence I had woken up to. This was a heavy, suffocating vacuum, the kind that sucks the oxygen out of a room right before an explosion. Arthur's face went through a complex series of microexpressions. First, the slack-jawed shock of being challenged. Then, the rapid blinking of calculation. Finally, the settling mask of aggressive denial. "Don't be ridiculous," Arthur spat, though his voice lacked its earlier boom. He shifted his weight, turning his body slightly away from me, a defensive posture I recognized from 1,000 board meetings. "You don't know what you're talking about. I run a clean ship." "Do you?" I asked, keeping my tone conversational. "Because when I filed your taxes 3 years ago, I noticed some interesting discrepancies on Schedule E rental income from a property you don't own. And then There was the refinancing application you asked me to look over last year, the one you suddenly decided not to submit once I started asking questions about the income verification section. Frank looked between us, a half-chewed chip visible in his open mouth. What's she talking about, Dad? What rental income? Shut up, Frank, Arthur snapped. He turned his glare back to me. You're bluffing. You're trying to distract from the fact that you're abandoning your family. This is about Frank. This isn't about my finances. It's all connected, Arthur, I said. I stood up. I'm going to my office to print something out. While I'm gone, I suggest you think very carefully about how much you want the IRS or the bank to know about your creative accounting. And Frank, get your feet off my table. That coffee table costs more than your last 3 cars combined. I didn't wait for a response. I turned on my heel and walked down the hallway to the second bedroom, the one Arthur had claimed for Frank. I had turned it into a state-of-the-art home office. I stepped inside and locked the door. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel the pulse in my fingertips. I wasn't as calm as I looked. My hands were shaking as I sat down at my desk, the dual 4K monitors flickering to life. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a forensic investigator of my own trauma. I opened my encrypted cloud drive. I had a folder simply titled Family Liabilities. It was a grim habit I had picked up after the first time Arthur tried to guilt me into co-signing a loan for Frank. I kept copies of everything. Every tax return I helped them with, every email Arthur forwarded to me because he couldn't figure out the PDF, every voicemail. I pulled up the document that had been nagging at the back of my mind for months. It was a copy of a home equity line of credit, HELOC. Application Arthur had filled out 18 months ago. He had sent it to me to fix the formatting, but I had read the content. At the time, I thought he was just being optimistic about his income. Now, looking at the numbers with fresh eyes and the context of Frank's sudden homelessness, the pattern emerged. He had listed me as a tenant in their house. He had forged a lease agreement claiming I paid $1,500 a month in rent for a room I hadn't lived in for a decade. He used that fictitious income to qualify for a $60,000 loan against their house. I pulled up the county clerk's public records on my second monitor. The loan had been approved and dispersed. The question was, where did the $60,000 go? Their house hadn't been renovated. Molly was still driving her 12-year-old sedan. Arthur complained about the price of milk. I began to type, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. I wasn't just looking at numbers, I was mapping a user journey. The user was Arthur. The goal was enabling Frank. The pain point was a lack of cash. I logged into a background check service I used for vetting freelancers. It wasn't cheap, but it was thorough. I ran a search on Frank. The results populated within minutes. Speeding tickets, a small claims judgment from a landlord, and then a darker entry from 14 months ago, a settlement payment to a property management group for damages to a rental unit. The amount was staggering. I connected the dots. The date of the settlement matched the disbursement of Arthur's loan almost to the week. Arthur hadn't just committed mortgage fraud to fix his roof. He had committed fraud to pay for Frank to destroy an apartment, and he had used my name to do it. I picked up my phone and dialed David, a corporate attorney I had worked with on a previous startup acquisition. Evelyn, David answered on the second ring. It's Saturday. You better be calling to tell me you're at a brunch. I need you to look at a document, I said, my voice steel. And I need to know the statute of limitations on bank fraud involving a forged lease agreement. There was a pause on the line. Evelyn, what did they do? They tried to steal my future, David, I whispered. Again, but this time I have the receipts. I emerged from the office 20 minutes later, with a single sheet of paper in my hand. The atmosphere in the living room had shifted. Frank had moved from the sofa to the recliner, and he had opened a soda, my imported Italian soda that I saved for special occasions. Arthur was pacing by the window, muttering into his cell phone. When he saw me, He hung up abruptly. Finally, Arthur sneered. Done playing secretary? Look, Evelyn, I've been thinking, we can compromise. Frank can take the smaller bedroom. You won't even know he's here. I'll even throw in a few $100 for groceries. He was trying to pivot. He was trying to regain the high ground by appearing reasonable. It was a classic negotiation tactic. Offer a concession that costs you nothing to distract from the demand that costs the other person everything. There is no compromise, Arthur, I said. I didn't call him Dad. I couldn't. And Frank isn't moving into the smaller bedroom. He's not moving in at all. We discussed this, Arthur shouted, his face reddening again. I am your father, I decide who. You decided to commit a felony, I interrupted, my voice cutting through his bluster like a scalpel. I walked over to the coffee table and placed the paper down, face up. It was a printout of the lease agreement he had forged. My signature, looped and shaky, looked nothing like my actual handwriting. Does this look familiar? I asked. Arthur looked down, he froze. His eyes bulged slightly, and he took a quick, involuntary step back. I don't know what that is, he stammered. It's the lease agreement you submitted to First National Bank 18 months ago, I said, stepping closer to him. It claims I live in your basement. It claims I pay you rent. It claims I am a source of income for you. Frank leaned forward, squinting at the paper. Wait, you were paying them rent? Then why couldn't I get a new car? I wasn't paying them anything, Frank, I said, not taking my eyes off Arthur. He forged it. He used my name and my credit standing to trick a bank into giving him $60,000. Arthur's face went from red to a pale, sickly gray. It was just paperwork, Evelyn. Everyone fudges the numbers a little. I needed the loan to fix the foundation. The house was settling. It was for your mother's safety. The foundation, I laughed, a cold, sharp sound. Is that what we're calling Frank now? I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen, projecting an image onto the 65-inch TV via AirPlay. It was the settlement record I had found. Payment, $58,500. Recipient, OAKWOOD Property Management. RE, DAMAGES and Settlement for Tenant Franklin Miller. You didn't fix the house, Arthur. I said, pointing at the screen. You paid off the apartment complex Frank trashed last year so they wouldn't sue him. You took out a $60,000 loan, putting your own home and Mom's home at risk of foreclosure just to clean up another one of his messes. Frank went silent. He lowered the soda can. For the first time, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. Not guilty, just uncomfortable that his secrets were being aired in 4K resolution. You told me that money came from an inheritance from Uncle Jerry, Frank muttered, looking at his dad. It doesn't matter where it came from, Arthur yelled, waving his arms frantically. I did what I had to do to protect this family, something you wouldn't understand, Evelyn, with your cold heart and your fancy furniture. I saved your brother from a lawsuit. You enabled him, I screamed back, the composure finally cracking. You stole my identity to bail him out. Do you realize that if you default on that loan, which you will because you have no income to pay it back, the bank takes your house? Do you realize you committed fraud in my name? I would never default, Arthur growled. I have it under control. Do you? I countered. Because I just checked the county records for that too, Arthur. You're 3 months behind on the mortgage. You're in pre-foreclosure. The silence that followed was absolute. Arthur looked like he had been punched in the gut. He slumped against the wall, the fight draining out of him. You check the mortgage, he whispered. I check everything, I said. I'm a UX designer. I look for broken systems. And this family? It's the most broken system I've ever seen. Arthur looked at me, his eyes pleading for the first time, not with love but with desperation. Evelyn, if they take the house, where will your mother go? I don't know, I said, but she's not coming here with Frank. You have to help us, Arthur said, his voice trembling. You have money, you can pay off the arrears, you can fix this. If you don't, Molly will find out. She doesn't know, I asked, though I already knew the answer. She thinks the money came from a bonus, Arthur admitted, looking at the floor. She thinks the mortgage is paid automatically. If she finds out I leveraged the house and lost it, it will kill her. He looked up at me, his eyes wet. Please, Evie, for your mother, just let Frank stay here. Let me save the money I would spend on his rent to catch up on the mortgage. It's the only way. It was the ultimate guilt trip. He was using his own incompetence and deception as a hostage. He was holding my mother's security gunpoint and telling me I was the one pulling the trigger. No. The word hung in the air, simple and devastating. Arthur's pitiful expression vanished in an instant, replaced by a snarl of pure rage. You selfish little witch. You'd let your mother be homeless? You'd let your brother starve. I'm not letting anyone starve, I said, crossing my arms. Frank is a 35-year-old man. He can get a job. He can work at a grocery store. He can work at a warehouse. He can do what I did, work. He has anxiety, Arthur shouted. He can't work those jobs. And I have a mortgage, I yelled back, and a career, and a life that I built without stealing from anyone. Arthur pulled his phone out. I'm calling her. I'm calling Molly. I'm going to tell her that you're throwing us out. I'm going to tell her you refuse to help. Go ahead, I said. Put her on speaker. Arthur paused, his thumb hovering over the screen. He hadn't expected that. He expected me to fold to protect Molly from the truth, but he didn't realize that I was done protecting her from reality. He dialed. The ringtone echoed in the tense room. Arthur, Molly's voice came through, tinny and sweet. Are you boys settled in? Did Evelyn make you breakfast? Molly, Arthur said, his voice breaking theatrically. Molly, she's kicking us out. Evelyn, she refuses to help Frank. She's sending him to a shelter. I watched him manipulate her in real time. It was sickening. What? Molly sounded confused, her voice trembling. Evelyn, honey, is that true? You wouldn't do that to your brother. We're family. Mom, I said, stepping closer to the phone. Arthur isn't telling you the whole story. Ask him about the $60,000, Mom. Ask him about the second mortgage he took out on your house without telling you. Don't you listen to her, Arthur shouted into the phone. She's lying. She's trying to confuse you. Second mortgage? Molly's voice was faint. Arthur, what is she talking about? You said the house was paid off years ago. Arthur's stamina began to crumble. He couldn't juggle the lies anymore. He forged my signature, Mom, I said clearly. He committed a felony. And now the bank is threatening to take your house because he gave all the money to Frank to pay for the apartment Frank destroyed. That's a lie, Frank yelled from the recliner, standing up. It was an accident. The fire was an accident. You set fire to the apartment? Molly screamed. Frank, you told me you just broke a lease. The chaos was escalating. I was watching the carefully constructed ecosystem of lies my family lived in implode. Arthur hung up the phone. He looked at me with pure hatred. You happy now? You upset your mother. You broke her heart. You broke her trust, I corrected. I just turned on the lights. Arthur took a step toward me. His hands were balled into fists. For a second, I saw the violence in his eyes, the physical threat he had always hinted at but never fully enacted on me. You're going to fix this, he hissed, stepping into my personal space. You're going to write a check for the arrears and you're going to give Frank a key. Or so help me God, Evelyn, I will make sure you never have a moment of peace. I will show up at your job. I will tell your boss what a heartless bitch you are. I will picket on the sidewalk outside this building. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. If you take one more step, Arthur, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying calm, I won't just refuse to help. I will call the police right now and report the forgery. I will have you arrested for identity theft and bank fraud. You will go to prison. And Frank. I looked at my brother, who was shrinking back against the wall. I will sue you for the emotional damages, and I will make sure every landlord in the state knows about the fire. You will never rent again. You wouldn't, Arthur challenged, though he stopped moving. You wouldn't send your own father to jail. I looked at the man who had called me selfish for 10 years while robbing me blind. I looked at the man who prioritized his son's laziness over my survival. Arthur, I said, I have the police on speed dial, and I have David, my lawyer, drafting the affidavit right now. Try me. I held up my phone. David had texted me back. Draft is ready. Do you want me to file the police report or wait for your signal? I showed the screen to Arthur. You have 5 minutes to get your son, get your bags, and get out of my apartment, I said. If you are not gone in 5 minutes, I press send. Arthur looked at the phone. He looked at the paperwork on the table. He looked at the determination in my eyes. He realized, finally, that the Bank of Evelyn was closed. Grab the bags, Frank, Arthur muttered, his voice defeated and old. But Dad... Grab the bags, Arthur roared, the sound echoing off my high ceilings. I watched as they scrambled, the shuffling of suitcases, the frantic zipping of coats. They moved with the desperate energy of rats fleeing a sinking ship. But as they reached the door, Arthur turned back one last time. He didn't look sorry. He looked vengeful. You think you've won, he spat, but you've lost your family today. I hope this apartment keeps you warm at night because we are done with you. That's the plan, I said. They walked out. I slammed the heavy oak door shut and locked the deadbolt. Click. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, listening to their footsteps fade down the hallway. I waited for the tears to come, for the guilt to crash over me. But it didn't. Instead, my phone buzzed. It was Molly. I stared at the screen. This was the final hurdle, the confrontation with the enabler. The climax wasn't Arthur leaving. It was what I had to do next to ensure they never came back. I picked up the phone. Hello, Mom, I said. Evelyn, she was sobbing. He's coming home. He says you threatened him. He says you're ruining us. Please tell me it's not true. Tell me you'll help. I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment I cut the cord. Mom, I said, I'm not going to help Arthur hide his lies anymore. And I'm not going to pay for Frank's mistakes, but I will help you. What do you mean? She sniffled. I mean, I said, walking back to the window to look out at the city I had conquered. I'm coming over. And I'm bringing a foreclosure attorney. We're going to have a family meeting, a real one. The drive to my childhood home usually took 45 minutes. Today, it felt like a lifetime compressed into a single highway stretch. I hadn't gone alone. I had called David, who agreed to meet me there. If there's fraud involved, Evelyn, he had said, and you're confronting them, you need a witness who isn't related by blood, and you need someone who speaks legal consequences fluently. When I pulled into the cracked concrete driveway of the split-level house I grew up in, my stomach tightened. But it wasn't fear anymore. It was the cold, hard resolve of a surgeon preparing to amputate a gangrenous limb. I noticed immediately that the driveway wasn't empty. Arthur's rusting sedan was there, parked haphazardly. But next to it was Aunt Linda's pristine SUV and Uncle Jerry's truck. My hands tightened. Ed on the steering wheel. Arthur hadn't just gone home to lick his wounds. He had called in the cavalry. He had convened a family meeting, an ambush designed to shame me into submission using the collective pressure of the clan. I stepped out of my car just as David's sleek Audi pulled up to the curb. He stepped out, adjusting his tie. He looked out of place in this working-class suburb, a shark in a goldfish pond. Ready? He asked. No, I said, grabbing the thick file folder from my passenger seat. But let's finish it. I unlocked the front door with my key, a key Arthur had forgotten to demand back. The living room was crowded. Arthur sat in his recliner like a deposed king holding court. Frank was on the floor, head in his hands, playing the part of the tragic victim perfectly. Molly was sitting on the sofa, clutching a tissue, looking pale and terrified. And flanking them were Aunt Linda, Arthur's older sister, the matriarch of guilt trips, and Uncle Jerry. The conversation stopped dead as I walked in. She's here, Arthur announced, pointing a shaking finger at me. The daughter who would see her own family on the street. Aunt Linda stood up, her floral blouse rustling. She had the kind of face that was permanently set in a judgment grimace. "Evelyn," she scolded, her voice dripping with disappointed piety. "Your father called us. He told us everything. How you refused to let your brother stay in your empty guest room, how you threatened them. I changed your diapers, young lady. I expected better from you." "You don't know the half of it, Linda," Uncle Jerry chimed in, crossing his thick arms. "Abandoning family, when you have so much, it's sinful." I looked at them, the tribunal of Arthur. They had no idea they were defending a criminal. "I didn't come here to argue with you, Aunt Linda," I said, my voice steady, "and I brought my lawyer." I gestured to David, who stepped forward and gave a polite, shark-like nod. "Good afternoon." "A lawyer," Arthur laughed, a desperate cracking sound. "You brought a lawyer to your mother's house. See how cold she is." "I brought a lawyer because a crime has been committed," I said, walking to the center of the room. I didn't sit. I stood tall. "And since you invited an audience, Arthur, they should see the evidence too." "We don't want to see your lies," Linda snapped. "Sit down, Linda," I said. It was the first time I had ever given her an order. The sheer authority in my voice made her blink and sink back onto the sofa arm. I turned to Molly. She looked small, shrunken by the weight of the yelling. "Mom," I said softly, "Arthur told you I wouldn't help. That's a lie. I am here to help you. But to do that, you need to see what Arthur and Frank have actually been doing." "Don't look at it, Molly," Arthur shouted, lunging forward to grab the folder I was opening. David stepped in between us. He didn't touch Arthur. He just occupied the space with such professional menace that Arthur recoiled. "Mr. Miller," David said calmly, "I wouldn't do that. Interfering with the revelation of evidence regarding bank fraud could be construed as obstruction." Arthur froze. The word fraud hung in the air like smoke. I handed the first document to Molly. "This is the deed to the house, Mom, or rather, the lien against it." Molly took the paper with trembling hands. What is this?" "Arthur told you the house was paid off in 2018, I said. "It was. But 18 months ago, he took out a $60,000 home equity line of credit. He put the house back in debt." "Arthur," Molly looked up, her eyes wide and wet. "You said that money was your pension lump sum." I had to," Arthur stammered, looking around at Linda and Jerry for support. "Expenses were high, inflation." "He didn't use it for inflation, Mom," I said, handing her the second document. "He used it to pay a settlement. Look at the date." Molly read the settlement agreement. "Oakwood Property Management, arson and water damage, Frank Miller." The room went dead silent. Even Aunt Linda gasped. "Frank," Molly whispered, "you told me the landlord was unfair. You told me you left because of black mold." Frank, the 35-year-old boy, shrank into himself. "It was an accident, Mom. I fell asleep with a cigarette. It wasn't a big deal." "It was a $58,000 accident," I corrected. "And Arthur paid for it by mortgaging your future." "But that's not the worst part," I continued, turning to the final page. "Arthur couldn't qualify for that loan on his pension alone. He needed more income, so he created a tenant." I dropped the forged lease on the coffee table. "He forged my signature," I said, looking directly at Uncle Jerry and Aunt Linda. "He committed identity theft against his own daughter. He told the bank I was living in the basement paying $1,500 a month. And because he hasn't been paying the loan back, the bank is 3 weeks away from initiating foreclosure proceedings." "Foreclosure?" Aunt Linda whispered, her hand going to her mouth. "Arthur, is this true?" Arthur stood there, cornered. The bluster was gone. The king of the castle persona had evaporated, leaving behind a scared, pathetic old man who had gambled everything on a son who would never pay out. "I was going to fix it," Arthur whispered. "If Evelyn had just given Frank the money, if she had just let him live there, I could have used the savings to catch up. It's her fault. She has the money to fix this." "No, Arthur," Molly said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. She stood up. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother not as a satellite orbiting Arthur, but as a planet of her own. She looked at the papers. She looked at Frank, who was refusing to make eye contact. She looked at Arthur. "You risked our home," Molly said, her voice trembling with a rage that had been buried for 40 years. "My home, the home I raised my children in, you risked it to cover up for him. Again." "Molly, please," Arthur pleaded. "And then you tried to destroy your daughter to fix it," Molly continued, tears streaming down her face. "You brought everyone here to humiliate her, to bully her into paying for your crimes." She turned to me. "Evelyn, is it true? Is the bank taking the house?" "We can stop it," I said. "David and I have looked at the numbers. But the only way to save the equity is to sell the house. Immediately, before the bank auctions it." "Sell the house?" Arthur screamed. "I am not selling my house. I will not be told what to do by." "Shut up, Arthur," Molly screamed. The sound was so shocking that Frank actually flinched. "You don't have a choice," Molly spat. "Because if you don't agree to sell, I'm taking these papers to the police myself. I will testify against you. I will tell them you forged that signature." Arthur looked at her, stunned. The enabler had finally snapped. The silence was broken. "We are selling the house," Molly said, wiping her eyes. "And Frank, you need to pack your things." "Where am I going?" Frank asked, panic rising in his voice. Molly looked at him with a heartbreak that was painful to witness. "I don't know, Frank. You're 35, figure it out." The fallout was swift and brutal. With David's help, we listed the house the following Monday. Because the market was hot, we got a cash offer within 48 hours. It wasn't a fortune, but after paying off the HELOC, the original mortgage arrears, and the closing costs, there was enough left over for Molly. But not for Arthur's. The revelation of the forgery had shattered the family dynamic irrevocably. Aunt Linda and Uncle Jerry, faced with the undeniable proof of Arthur's criminal stupidity, had retreated into a shameful silence. They didn't apologize to me, people like that never do, but they stopped taking Arthur's calls. The divorce was not amicable. Molly, guided by a fire I didn't know she possessed, refused to seek alimony. She just wanted her half of the equity and her freedom. I helped her find a small, one-bedroom condo in a senior living community about 20 minutes from my apartment. It was bright, clean, and safe. For the first time in her life, she had a checking account that only she could access. The afternoon we moved her in, she sat on her new balcony, drinking tea. She looked 10 years younger. "I should have done this years ago," she said softly. "I always thought I was keeping the peace. I didn't realize I was just feeding the war." "You're safe now, Mom," I said, squeezing her hand. As for Arthur and Frank, their ending was less picturesque. With the house sold and the proceeds split, Arthur took his half and rented a dingy 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city. He took Frank with him, of course. He couldn't help himself. They were locked in a toxic orbit, two drowning men clinging to each other. But the dynamic had shifted. Arthur was bitter, broken, and devoid of the authority he once wielded. Without a house to rule over, he was just an angry old man with a mounting pile of debt. I heard through a cousin that Frank finally got a job. Not a career, not a brand, but a job. He was stocking shelves at a warehouse on the night shift. It wasn't much, and I knew he hated every second of it, but for the first time in his life, he was eating food he had paid for. The legal threat of the forgery hung over Arthur's head like a guillotine. I never officially filed the police report. Molly begged me not to, but I kept the affidavit signed and notarized in my safe. I made sure Arthur knew it existed. I made sure he knew that one wrong move, one harassed phone call, one attempt to extort Molly, and I would drop the blade. That threat bought us our silence. 6 months after the invasion, I sat in my apartment. It was a Tuesday evening. I had finished a major project for a client, and the apartment was filled the soft, ambient glow of the city lights. I walked to my kitchen, my beautiful, clean kitchen, and poured a glass of wine. I walked to the living room and sat on the sofa. I looked at the spot where Frank had put his dirty feet. The rug had been professionally cleaned, the trace of him was gone. The silence in the apartment was no longer just expensive. It was heavy with meaning. It was the sound of boundaries held. It was the sound of a cycle broken. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from Dad Arthur. I stared at the preview. Evelyn, it's your father. Frank's car broke down. We just need $500 to get it running so he can get to work. Please be reasonable. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel guilt. I felt nothing but a profound, cool detachment. I tapped the screen, opened the contact settings, and pressed the button I should have pressed 10 years ago. Black collar. I put the phone down, took a sip of my wine, and watched the sun set over the city I had earned. The knocking had stopped, and it would never start again.